Hey guys, Tony Adragna back here on my YouTube channel, giving you some of my daily updates and whatnot. You'll have to excuse me a little bit. My voice is kind of going out. Not really, but it's not sore or anything. But for some reason, it's been a little off today. So sorry about that. But I am back. I had a long weekend in Chicago. If you watched my last video, I was in Chicago for one of my good friends' bachelor parties. I had a great time. Got to walk around Wrigleyville. Went out in Wrigleyville, and it was a blast. Didn't go to a Cubs game, but walked around the stadium during a Cubs game. We got to witness that atmosphere. I haven't been to a Cubs game at Wrigley in quite some time, since I was younger, so it was neat just to kind of go back there and see the atmosphere now that I'm older. I can appreciate it a little bit more. But I had a blast doing that. Today, my update, I want to kind of show you how, not show you, or at least tell you how, I prepare for broadcast, what goes into a broadcast, how I do it, whether that be, just play-by-play, or on the radio, or an interview, or if I have to write an article. Just kind of give you a glimpse at what I do and how I do it. So first of all, I'll start with play-by-play. In the preparation that goes into one of my play-by-play broadcasts is always, it's going to vary a bit, just based upon when I know what I'm broadcasting. For instance, Hoosier Hysteria I knew for 3 weeks, so I was able to prepare basically for 3 weeks. Whereas a couple of my broadcasts, I've only had a day or two to where I really have to crunch in a lot of time, within a day or two to try to get everything I need to know. Whereas if I have 3 weeks, I can space it out a little bit. Now, if I want to break into the industry, I'll never have 3 weeks to prepare for a broadcast, probably. So I'm realistic in that fact. But what I like to do first when I start out, it really depends on the sport, too. I mean, if I'm doing basketball, I don't have to look up, all the rules and quarters and whatnot just because I'm very comfortable with it. Played it for quite some time, so I know it really well. But when I do something like men's soccer, which, I didn't play soccer past first or second grade. I follow it on TV and stuff, but I like to try to get some of the terminology down. So, say I do a soccer broadcast, I'll try to talk to some people that are very familiar with soccer. A lot of times that was my former roommate, Tyler Alexander. I would talk with him and ask him, what does this mean? How do they do this? If they're doing this, what do you call it? And that always helped me a lot when I was doing soccer broadcasts. But so what I like to do first is just get familiar with the sport, regardless of what it may be. Even women's basketball has a couple of quirky rules, so I like to check that. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but in women's basketball, at least in college, there's no 10-second violation backcourt. They can hold the ball backcourt for all 30 seconds of the shot clock if they wanted to. That's something that I had to learn, and just things like that. Or softball's only 6-7 innings, things like that. So I just want to get familiar with the sport when I first do that, and that, like I said, depending on what sport it is, can take from an hour to a few hours. Just trying to get comfortable with that, and then after I do that, I like to really start diving into what these players, their backstories and some of what they can do. Now, when I do play-by-play, something I've learned from guys that are older in the broadcast, a lot of guys like to do it differently, and it truly depends on if you're doing radio or if you're doing a television broadcast. A lot of people wouldn't know. It's completely different if you're doing play-by-play for radio, if you're doing play-by-play for television, and it's different how much you talk. Now, if you're doing play-by-play for radio, you're the most important voice because you're trying to tell people exactly what's happening. You're giving them step-by-step play-by-play of what's going on. Now, if you're on TV, majority of the time these people can watch. So the analyst is the most important voice because they're analyzing what's happening. People want to know, from an expert opinion what's going on. So it all depends on what medium you're broadcasting on, how much you talk, and what you need to know. Now, when I'm doing play-by-play on television, I really like to try to figure out backstories and try to talk about those rather than relying on stats so much when I do broadcasts. When I first started broadcasting games, I relied so heavily on just trying to spout out numbers, which numbers are important. People want to hear them, but they're not the most important aspect of a broadcast, in my opinion. And so I like to get the backstories and whatnot, and then obviously look at the statistics. And basically, I'm just funneling all this information and copying and pasting into Microsoft Word, and just basically just trying to get an outline of what I want to talk about. Well, then I have a template I use that I created, and that I used for my broadcast board. Now, this is a broadcast board for me. It's a manila folder. I use both sides of it. And basically what I do is that template is each player's name, their number, their position, some stats about those players. For example, this broadcast board I have right here is the IU women's basketball, Oklahoma State women's basketball broadcast boards. And as you can see here, it's got player's name. Let's see if I can. The camera is exact opposite of what I'm looking at. So you've got the player's name. You've got some of the information about those players, and then it's gonna just go down here. So here's the player's name and just their statistics for the year and whatnot. And then this down here is relevant information like their last game or their last couple of games. So I like to do that. And then this information up here is just from it's facts about the team, what their record is, who their coach is, what the coach's record is, who the assistant coaches are. And so I like to do that. And then as you can see, I've got some things highlighted, and it goes all the way down for each player on both teams. And these things, like I said, it takes a lot of time and preparation and work, and that's just to get the basic just stats and some storylines about each player, so that when I'm broadcasting, I can just look down and say Linda Rubena checking into the game. She's a 6'3" junior from Iowa Western Community College, just transferred in for the Hoosiers. She's a career 7.9 points per game and 5 rebounds per game. And last year she was a really great junior college prospect. Now I couldn't have told you any of that without reading my broadcast board, but nobody would know that. They would think, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. He really knows Linda Rubena, or Jasmine McGee, a 5'11" junior coming out of Anderson University, another junior college player on the team. Her and Rubena were both junior college national, in the National Player of the Year running for junior colleges. Where if you didn't have that in front of you, there's no way you can have that all memorized. And I know that when I used to watch broadcasts on television, I was always like, man, how do they just know all this stuff? Like, I thought producers were funneling these things into these guys' headsets, and they were just kind of spouting off what people were telling them, which I guess some people, their producers do tell them a little bit more than what I was able to work with, I guess. But I really, I kind of use this as a crutch and, talking points and just being able to give basic facts. And then on both sides, I've got just team facts, points per game for team and how many they're giving up. And, unfortunately, this game, the IU women's basketball versus Oklahoma State game, which I called a couple falls ago, was Oklahoma State's first game back, first game since their head coach died. Their head coach was going on a recruiting visit, and unfortunately his plane crashed, and he passed away. So I've obviously got some talking points and things like that on here. So that's just a little bit of how I go into a broadcast and really prepare for a broadcast. And doing a radio show is very similar to that, in the fact that I set up an outline of what I want to talk about, give a few talking points, and then I kind of go from there on radio shows. And then interviews are the same way. I've got a few questions I want to ask the guy, but when I do interviews, I obviously make sure that I'm not just asking these questions, in order of how I have them, because a lot of times you just have to build off of what people say when you're interviewing them, and you don't have time for some questions and things like that. So that's how I basically prepare for my broadcast, whether I'm doing radio shows, radio play-by-play, and things like that. And then writing is very similar in the fact that it takes preparation, but when it comes to broadcast, it's just you're live for the most part. If you mess up, people hear it, people see it. So you really want to be on your A game, and if you have, if you prepare properly, you're going to know enough. You're going to have enough in front of you that you're able to go along with that. And it's something I've added in my broadcast boards. Like I said, this one's over a couple years old. Now I've got columns here, and for each quarter or half, depending on which sport I'm calling, where I take statistics as well. I didn't used to take my own statistics, now I do. So while the game's going on, not only am I broadcasting, I'm also taking stats of what's going on, so that I'm able to spout off. Not only is she averaging 8 points per game, but today she's got 12, and things like that. And some of that, seems pretty obvious, but you don't really think about it when you're listening to other broadcasters. So almost always, when you hear broadcasters broadcasting, they've got something very similar to this in front of them that they're able to look at and that they use to prepare, and not only prepare but also use on the broadcast. If they need a fact or just somebody's statistics. So once again, this video ran a little long. Sorry about that. Didn't exactly talk about what's going on in sports. It's really dead time. The home run derby is tonight. There's some free agent stuff still going on in the NBA. The MLB is kind of heating up a little bit, but at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot to talk about sport-wise at this time of year, like I mentioned in my last video, just because of, the NFL, nothing really going on. There's not really training camp. The NBA has ended. Free agency's kind of starting to wind down. The NBA draft's over. MLB halfway through the season is irrelevant half the time, just because teams that are hot now aren't hot later, and things like that. And don't get me wrong, there's news stories that I can talk about, and I'll continue. I'll dive into those at some point. But as I'm starting to get my foundation for my YouTube channel and just these daily updates, I try to think of something interesting that people would actually want to watch. There's not millions, but there's hundreds of people talking about exactly what happened in sports today, and I'm totally okay with the fact that I'm not probably the person you're going to go to for that on my YouTube channel. So I want to do something that I'm able to use. But my dad's calling me for dinner because, like I said, I'm unemployed at home, so I'm going to get going off here. But I really do appreciate you taking time to watch. If you enjoy these, hit subscribe. But I'll talk to you guys later.